Previously in part 1.
Oh, that was just horrible. Anyway, we found out that there wasn't really a famous aspiring novel about werewolves, and that the tropes the movie The Wolfman introduced are actually very similar to those of vampires. We took a look at werewolves in cinema in the 20s, 30s and 40s. So, what about the rest of horror cinema? Like I said, The Wolfman has been the basis for almost every werewolf movie to date, and thus other movie monsters would always have a head start. In the second big wave of horror movies, the Hammer Studio films of the 60s, the werewolf was pushed aside once again by Frankenstein and his monster, Dracula and others. There is the fairly well-known The Curse of the Werewolf with Oliver Reed, but why it fails on almost every level, I will explain in my second review. Then there is the 70s, the golden age of cinema, when filmmakers were experimenting in numerous ways and exploring the borders of what was acceptable in the cinematic landscape. Especially the ones from Italy, during the exploitation boom. For some reason, the Italians made like 1 trillion horror movies in that period. And they all have the word Holocaust in them, that can be a good sign. It naturally spawned a couple of crazy and bizarre werewolf films, but most of them have a real cult status and are really obscure, even though some of them are pretty damn good. The 80s, the age that killed the golden age of cinema. Whoa, I was just joking. Jeez, guys. Touched a nerve. Obviously, the 80s brought us some great movies, but you have to admit that it is a weird period, especially for horror movies. A couple of commercially successful horror movies in the 70s, especially Spielberg's Jaws, proved that there was a great potential in the horror genre. After much scientific research, a formula was created. Masked monster plus gimmick over boob squared equals... and thus the horror blockbuster was born. Now, whether this was a good or a bad thing is the subject for another time, as I don't wish to make this video any more longer and more boringer. But was it good for the werewolf movies? That's what we want to know. Well, the 80s gave us some of the best werewolf movies ever made. And by some I mean 3. The Howling, The Company of Wolves and An American Werewolf in London, which is the third movie I'm going to review, by the way. They showed us that to make a good werewolf movie you need 2 things. Great special effects, so a budget, and an inventive and original way to tell the story. So effort. With the commercialization of horror movies, the werewolves were safe in the first department. They looked pretty damn good. And do blockbusters encourage effort? Well, fortunately they do, bringing us one great werewolf story after another. Oh no, wait, they totally don't.
Hollywood sucks. Again.
Yes, the few really good werewolf movies sadly disappeared in a sea of sequels that got exponentially worse.
Howling 2. It's not over. Yet.
You should not run away from home.
I don't like home.
Why, child?
Because my stepfather tried to rape me and he's a werewolf.
Oh god, this is painful.
I'm sorry. I thought it was a...
Just make it stop.
She didn't say that.
No, I wasn't serious.
That's what she said.
What?
But you're never serious. That's how she said.
Let's just go to the rest.
No! God, please, no! No! No!
You gotta make us stop! Please! Why?
Okay, so sadly, the blockbuster trend to not give a shit hasn't really stopped yet. It arguably has gotten worse. As much as I love the Blair Witch Project, it did create a false idea that all horror movies should be really cheap. It's not like there weren't cheap B movies before, but after Blair Witch, the B movies were even cheaper, especially with the boom of CGI technology, which when handled with care and, well, a budget, looks pretty nice. But when shoved in a monster movie that barely reaches a $1 million budget, looks like this. This made the horror scene even trashier than it already was. And the werewolves suffered too. I mean, even with all the bad werewolf movies that had already come out, the millennium brought some of the most dreadful, and I mean really awful werewolf movies ever.
What?
And I don't want to be one of those guys who says Twilight destroyed werewolves, but Twilight destroyed werewolves. All it did was make it more obvious how much of a blatant copy of vampires the werewolves have become. Vampires had a strong legacy to fall back on, but werewolves, they were already on thin ice. And don't get me started on those juvenile underworld movies too, where they're just another monster, just one of the bunch. Do they not see the great potential werewolf characters have? But in all fairness, it's not all bad. There are, in between the dominating monster that is Hollywood, some really clever and inventive werewolf movies. They are scarce, but they are there. Oye ma hoe zoekt. And I will talk about one of them in my final review of Ginger Snaps.
Supernovas. A goddamn force of nature. I feel like I could do just about anything.
Conclusion. If there's one thing the good werewolf movie showed us, it's that to make one you need a good compelling story with a fresh and original approach, a decent budget and effort. And most movies today seem to lack one or more of these elements. But who knows, maybe it will just take one refreshing werewolf story to inspire a new generation of werewolf enthusiasts and studio executives who make the decisions, basically. Meanwhile, I'm going to honor the good ones we already have and bash the bad ones that made the genre to what it is today. So see you in the next one, a review of The Wolfman, the one where it all began. Thank you so much for watching. I would like to hear your thoughts on werewolves. Do you think they're underrated or not? And if so, maybe you have your own theory. Anyway, I would like to hear it very much. Let's open a conversation here, okay? And it would be much appreciated if you support this new channel by subscribing or following us on the Facebook or the Twitter. Anyway, thanks for watching. Freaks out.
Get off! Get away! This is still better.